So this dream I had was on February 28th. Um, I had like an aerial view of a walled city, like a European kind of looking, age with the buildings and all of that. I couldn't see the ground or the streets, but I could see like the tops of the buildings, and there was a definite wall kind of around it. And it was almost like watching a movie panning from left to right. Um, and what was kind of covering my view of the ground was, I knew, was like snow clouds, but I could see bright flashes of light kind of underneath these clouds, like bombs going off underneath them. And then the dream went to, in European kind of cities, they have these big squares with, statues and monuments and whatnot, and stairs kind of leading up to that. And there were just displaced people on these stairs. And then it kind of zoomed in on a woman laying on her right side wearing magenta. She was dressed head to toe with like a head covering and like a, like an old Eastern European looking kind of garb in magenta. And then it panned on to a woman wearing yellow with the exact same outfit on. And I said to myself in the dream, oh my gosh, this is the Ukraine. And then I woke up.
Wow, that's really a troubling dream. It's interesting, some of the things that you're saying. The very beginning, I missed the first part.
Oh, sure.
You said you couldn't see the ground, but you could see up.
I could see the tops of the building. So it was like an aerial view. I couldn't see what was going on the ground because there was like a cloud cover almost of snow clouds, but you could see like the tops of the buildings, but bright flashes of light beneath what was like this cloud covering that I knew was just bombs going off, but it was a walled city, very old looking.
And it was one bright flash of light or multiple bright
No,
flashes?
all throughout, multiple, all throughout the entire area.
I mean, was it like bright yellow or was it like bright white?
Orange, orangish yellow, red, like, yeah.
Like fire.
Like fire, yeah.
Okay. So you were flying, you don't know what you were in, but you were
I
like,
wasn't flying. I was just almost like I was watching a movie. It was just an aerial view of this kind of scene, and it was spanning from like left to right. And the same thing with the women and the displaced people, and I saw them at the base of this kind of monument thing, and I couldn't see what the monument was. It was spanning from left to right, like a camera kind of moving really slow.
okay. So you couldn't identify what city it was in or any key landmarks.
No, but I did say in the dream to myself, this is the Ukraine.
This is the Ukraine. When did you have the dream?
February 28th.
February 28th. That was before the attack, right?
February 25th is when they invaded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
4 days after.
4 days after. Okay, and so from that place, you saw women walking in the street, and that's when you saw the lady completely, or what?
Well, there were just kind of groups of people kind of all around that were indistinct, but I saw two distinct women who were identical, not standing together. They're separate. They were wearing kind of like the really old, Eastern European like head garb and dressed like head to toe in these kind of gowns. And the first one was head to toe magenta or like fuchsia, and the second was head to toe like yellow.
Did that cause alarm to you? Do you know the?
No, it didn't really. It was just something I was observing.
My background is nuclear power, and all of the radiological warning signs and nuclear warning signs are all yellow and magenta. So to see that in a dream where you're seeing bright flashes amidst cloud cover is very disturbing. Because it's the idea, it represents the idea of nuclear weapons. I'm not saying nuclear weapons are going to be
Yeah.
dropped in Ukraine. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying
Hmm.
this dream is indicative of a nuclear component, which could be there's weapons that Russia is going in to retrieve. It could be, I don't have enough information based on just what you're saying to make a determination, other than the fact that there is definitely a strong nuclear component. What God is showing you in this dream, and because the dream has to do with Ukraine. Now, it's also interesting that there was a firefight and a fire and an attack on a nuclear power plant in the Ukraine. And the Russians, by what I understand from the news that, and I listen to news with I mean it's so hard to know anything at all that we can believe, especially because they're
Oh yeah.
completely whitewashing everything that's happening
Yeah.
in Russia and Ukraine. They're blaming every single thing on one person. I mean, it's just it's so much disinformation right now. But by what I've studied and by what I've seen, there was, in fact, a skirmish over a nuclear power plant. And by what I've heard and understood from multiple sources, though I don't trust most of them, but multiple of them together seem to indicate that Russia did fight for and retain control of a nuclear power plant, and everything that has to do with nuclear power warning signs is yellow and magenta, not just the nuclear weapons side, but also, and in particular, the nuclear power plant side. Um, and so the idea is now if somebody said, well, what about a radioactive leak? Well, if one of the women was cut in the head and dripping blood, that would be indicative of like a radioactive leak. But because they were dressed head to toe, one was yellow and one was magenta, but they looked like twins, they were exactly the same, leads me to believe that God was indicating the idea. And the fact that you didn't know what yellow and magenta meant, which is why I asked you that, if you knew. Sometimes people are you in the medical field? Looks like you're in the
Hmm.
medical. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Sometimes people in the medical field, if they deal with internal medicine or nuclear medicine, they see the signs. But yellow and magenta is interesting because we've gotten that in other dreams as well. And so it's also interesting because obviously Putin has said some things related to, or things have been said that have put the idea of the release of nuclear weapons somehow on the table, whether it's because there's people that want to paint him in a bad light, or because he wants to be, explosive with the deterrent option, or leaving all options on the table. It doesn't even matter what is being said. The fact that it's in the discussion right now, I think, is the idea that you can see yellow and magenta in your purview. You can look over there and you can see them. There they are. They're these two twins. I'm not really sure what's going on, but they're not on the ground dead. There's not people all around them dead. There's not, so just as important as what you see in a dream is what you don't see. And so if God was going to indicate that there was going to be a, God forbid, a Chernobyl-like release of radionuclides to the environment, it would look different than seeing two women, one yellow and one magenta, walking down the street. If there was a leak, it would be different than seeing what you saw. But the fact that you saw that is the fact that there is a potential danger there, and there is a nuclear point of discussion in what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, which again is not particularly insightful because we already know that there's been a skirmish over a nuclear power plant. What I think is interesting is I don't know when that happened in relation to your dream, but I feel like it might have happened before your dream or after your dream. I feel like you might have dreamt it before the nuclear power plant. I think the nuclear power plant was just a couple of, it was in March, I believe. So since you had the dream at the end of February, this may have been, and again, one of those, not that you could do anything about it at all, but just that God was speaking to you and letting you know that there were certain things that were happening. And now it's in the news. You can get on, social media, YouTube, whatever, get on the news, and you can look up the attack on this nuclear power plant and see, Somebody is saying that I think Russia now controls 2 nuclear reactors, like the 2 ladies. That would be something that I would love to see an article on or verify, because that would be very indicative of what you're seeing in the dream. The fact that they were whole, that they weren't injured, that they weren't lying down. God is giving you information in particular about, I believe it has to do with even one of the reasons perhaps why the event took place. Um, but again, what we do is we take a multitude of dreams, put them together, and say, okay, God, what are you saying? Because it's hard to get like the motive of a war or something like that from one dream. But when we put the pieces together, we can get a lot. But it's a very significant dream, very significant. Neil, what are your
And
thoughts? Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
women were the women were laying down. They weren't injured, but they were laying down.
Right.
Oh, they were
They were laying
Hmm.
on the ground.
Hmm.
like they
Okay,
were
so
dead, or
No, they were just like they were hanging out, just laying on their side. I don't know,
okay,
not really. Yeah.
interesting.
Hmm.
Wow, I missed that part.
the aerial view piece is kind of like the Sears view. It being a movie is kind of interesting how it pans out. I think you're actually watching. No, it was moving in front of you. But the walled city, I think, is an indicator that whatever is going on is contained in a specific geographical location. So it's not doesn't cover all of Europe. It's a discrete location. Um, with the snow clouds covering basically the bottom, you can see the tops of the buildings. So if you can see the tops of the buildings, the cloud has to be below the buildings.
Hmm.
And that kind of cloud, I heard fog, or the fog of war. So you have this low hanging snow cloud that is kind of masking the fog of war, but it's also a timestamp. If it's a snow cloud, this is happening in winter. So I think this is something that's either going on now. It won't. It'll happen before it turns to spring, because well, unless you're in Buffalo, New York, it doesn't snow in the spring. So, um, so the lights that you see under the clouds are being the war is being masked. You can't really see it very clearly. The displaced people, I kind of agree. With what's going on in Ukraine right now, there's a lot of displaced people moving. They're not hanging out in squares, but they're moving. Um, I agree with John on the magenta and yellow clothes, that it has a nuclear component. But the fact that one has magenta and the other has yellow is kind of curious. At a tactical nuke level, there are components to it that are carried separately sometimes. So it's possible that there is a nuclear component to this that are being moved in parts into a place that potentially a walled city. I don't know if that's kind of a stretch, but the fact that it's a nuclear piece that is carried by 2 different people is, I think, significant. So I think it's something to watch out for, and it may be, like John was saying, 2 separate nuclear facilities, but there's a 2 there, so they're not both together, and they're not combined into the symbol of yellow and magenta. It's one and the other.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I heard the idea of a tactical nuke as well. I think
yeah.
that's interesting. It's also interesting that the ladies are lying down, because it's like lying in wait or lying in place,
Mm-hmm.
which means that they could
sleeper
be,
sleeper cells.
yeah, or they
Yeah,
could be hidden components that,
yeah.
you know, um, it could be that either side knew that they were there and went in to retrieve them. And this is what happens in the fog of war. One piece of intelligence, it can lead to a broader picture, but if we don't study all of the pieces together, then we're like, well, what does this mean? And what does this mean in light of others? He's got warning about a potential attack. Is he warning about the skirmish at the nuclear power facilities? Is he giving us motive for going into a particular city? Um, there's nothing that you can see in the dream that gives you any idea of location, like a landmark or anything that you've seen in the news or anything other than the fact that you just felt like it was Ukraine.
I don't really watch the news very much, so I just had the thought in my head, this is the Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a very interesting dream. You sent that in to us, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. Well, cool. We will definitely take a look at that in light of some other things that we've seen.